All right, guys, today we're going to start reading a few more chapters of James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. We left off last time at the end of chapter 13, so we're going to start with the beginning of chapter 14. Off, someone was shouting. Off! We're off at last! James woke up with a jump and he looked about him. The creatures were all out of their hammocks and moving excitedly around the room. Suddenly the floor gave a great heave as though the earthquake were taking place. Here we go, shouted the old green grasshopper, hopping up and down with excitement. Hold on tight. What's happening? Cried James, leaping out of his hammock. What's going on? The ladybug, who was obviously a kind and gentle creature, came over and stood beside him. In case you didn't know it, she said, we are about to depart forever from the top of this ghastly hill that we've been living on for so long. We are about to roll away inside of this great big beautiful peach to a land of what? Asked James. Never you mind, said the ladybug, but nothing could be worse than this desolate hilltop and those two repulsive aunts of yours. Here, here, they all shouted. Here, here. You may not have noticed it, the ladybug went on, but the whole garden, even before it reaches the steep edge of the hill, happens to be on a steep slope. And therefore the only thing that's been stopping this peach from rolling right down from the beginning is a thick stem attaching it to the tree. Break off the stem, and off we go. Watch it, cried Miss Spider as the room gave another lurch. Here we go. Not quite, not quite. At this moment, continued the ladybug, our centipede, who has a pair of jaws as sharp as razors, is up there on top of the peach nibbling away at the stem. In fact, he must be nearly through it, as you can tell from the way we're lurching about. Would you like me to take you under my wings so that you won't fall over when we start rolling? Well, that's very kind of you, said James, but I think I'll be all right. Just then the centipede stuck his grinning face through the hole of the ceiling and shouted, I've done it! We're off! We're off! The others cried. We're off! The journey begins, shouted the centipede. And who knows where it will end, muttered the earthworm. If you have anything to do with it, it can only mean trouble. Nonsense, said the ladybug. We are about to visit the most marvelous places and see the most wonderful things. Isn't that so, centipede? There is no knowing what we shall see, cried the centipede. We may see a creature with 49 heads who lives in the desolate snow, and whenever he catches a cold, which he dreads, he has 49 noses to blow. We may see a venomous pink-spotted scrunch who can chew up a man with one bite. It likes to eat 5 of them roasted for lunch and 18 for supper at night. We may see a dragon, and nobody knows that we won't see a unicorn there. We may see a terrible monster with toes growing out of the tufts of his hair. We may see the sweet little bitty bright hen, so playful, so kind, and well-bred. And such beautiful eggs, you just boil them, and then they explode and they blow off your head. A gnu and a gnocerus, surely you'll see. And that ginormous, ginorable gnat, whose sting when it stings you goes in through the knee and comes out through the top of your hat. We may even get lost and be frozen by snow. We may die in an earthquake or tremor. Or nastier still, we may even be tossed on the horns of a furious dilemma. But who cares? Let us go from this horrible hill. Let us roll, let us bowl, let us plunge. Let's go rolling and bowling and spinning until we're away from old Spiker and Sponge. 1 second later, slowly, insidiously, almost gently, the great peach started to lean forward and steal into motion. The whole room began to tilt over, and the furniture went sliding across the floor, and it crashed against the far wall. So did James and Ladybug and old green grasshopper, Miss Spider, and the earthworm, and also Centipede, who had just come slithering down the wall. Outside the garden, at that very moment, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker had just taken their places at the front gate, each with a big bunch of tickets in her hand, and the first stream of early morning sightseers was visible in the distance, climbing up the hill to view the peach. We shall make a fortune today, Aunt Spiker was saying. Just look at all those people. I wonder what has become of that horrible little boy of ours last night, Aunt Sponge said. He never did come back in, did he? Oh, he probably fell down in the dark and broke his leg, Aunt Spiker said. Or his neck, maybe, Aunt Sponge said hopefully. Just wait till I get my hands on him, Aunt Spiker said, waving her cane. He'll never want to stay out all night again. By the time I've finished with him, good gracious me, what's that awful noise? Both women swung around to look. The noise, of course, had been caused by the giant peach crashing through the fence that surrounded it, and now, gathering speed every second, it came rolling across the lawn toward the place where Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker were standing. They gaped, they screamed, they started to run, they panicked, they both got in each other's way, they began pushing and jostling, and each of them was thinking only about saving herself. Aunt Sponge, the fat one, tripped over a box that she'd brought along to keep the money in, and she fell flat on her face. Aunt Spiker immediately tripped over Aunt Sponge and came down on top of her, and they both lay on the ground, fighting and clawing and yelling and struggling frantically to get up again. But before they could do this, the mighty peach was upon them. There was a crunch, and then there was silence. The peach rolled on, and behind it, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker lay ironed out upon the grass, flat and thin and lifeless as a couple of paper dolls cut out of a picture book. And now the peach had broken out of the garden. It was over the hill, rolling and bouncing down the steep slope at a terrific pace. Faster and faster and faster it went. The crowds of people who were climbing up the hill suddenly caught sight of this terrible monster plunging down upon them, and they screamed and they scattered to the right and the left as it went hurtling by. At the bottom of the hill, it charged across the road, knocking over a telegraph pole, flattening 2 parked automobiles as it went. Then it rushed madly across the 20 fields, breaking down all the fences and hedges in its path, and it went right on through the middle of a herd of fine Jersey cows, and then through a flock of sheep, and then through a paddock of horses, and then through a yard full of pigs, and soon the whole countryside was a seething mass of panic-stricken animals stampeding in all directions. The peach was still going at a tremendous speed with no sign of slowing down, and about a mile farther on it came to a village. Down the main street of the village it rolled, with people leaping frantically out of its path right and left, and at the end of the street it went crashing right through the wall of an enormous building and out the other side, leaving 2 gaping round holes in the brickwork. This building happened to be a famous factory where they made chocolate, and almost at once a great river of warm, melting chocolate came pouring out of the holes in the factory wall. A minute later, this brown, sticky mess was flowing over every street in the village, oozing under the doors of houses and into people's shops and gardens. Children were wading in it up to their knees, and some were even trying to swim in it, and all of them were sucking it into their mouths in great, greedy gulps and shrieking with joy. But the peach rushed on across the countryside, on and on, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Cow sheds, stables, pigsties, barns, bungalows, hay racks, anything that got in its way, went toppling over like a ninepin. An old man sitting quietly beside the stream with his fishing rod whisked out of his hands as it went dashing by, and a woman called Daisy Entwistle was standing so close to it as it passed, she had the skin taken off of the tip of her long nose. Would it ever stop? Why should it? A round object will always keep rolling as long as it's on a downhill slope, and in this case the land sloped downhill all the way until it reached the ocean. The same ocean that James had begged his aunts to be allowed to visit the day before. Well, perhaps he was going to visit it now, the peach rushing closer and closer to it every second, closer, also to the towering white cliffs that came first. These cliffs are the most famous in the whole of England, and they are hundreds of feet high. Below them, the sea is deep and cold and hungry. Many ships have been swallowed up and lost forever in this part of the coast, and all the men who were with them as well, and the peach was now only 100 yards away from the cliff, now 50, now 20, now 10, now 5, and when it reached the edge of the cliff, it seemed to leap up into the sky and hang there suspended for a few seconds, then turning over and over in the air, it began to fall. Down, 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 smack! It hit the water with a colossal splash, and it sank like a stone. But a few seconds later it came up again, and this time up it stayed, floating serenely atop the surface of the water. At this moment the scene inside the peach itself was one of incredible chaos. James Henry Trotter was lying bruised and battered on the floor of the room amongst the tangled mass of centipede and earthworm and ladybug and spider and glowworm and old green grasshopper. In the whole history of the world, no travelers had ever been had a more terrible journey than these unfortunate creatures. It had started out well, with much laughing and shouting, and for the first few seconds the peach had begun to roll slowly forward, and nobody had minded being tumbled about a little bit. And when it went bump, the centipede had shouted, "That was Aunt Sponge!" And then bump again, "That was Aunt Spiker!" And there had been a tremendous burst of cheering all around. But as soon as the peach rolled out of the garden and began to go down the steep hill, rushing and plunging and bouncing madly downward, then the whole thing became a nightmare. James found himself being flung up against the ceiling and then back into the floor and then sideways against the wall and then up against the ceiling again and up and down and back and forth and round and all at the same time. The other creatures were flying through the air in every direction, and so were the chairs and the sofa, not to mention the 42 boots that belonged to the centipede. Everything and all of them were being rattled around like peas inside of an enormous rattle, and it was being rattled by a mad giant who refused to stop. To make it worse, something went wrong with the glowworm's lighting system, and the room was in pitchy darkness. There were screams and yells and curses and cries of pain, and everything kept going around, and once James made a frantic grab at some thick bars sticking out from the wall, only to find out they were a couple of the centipede's legs. "There you go! Let go, you idiot!" shouted the centipede, kicking himself free, and James was promptly flung across the room into the old green grasshopper's horny lap. Twice he got tangled up in Miss Spider's legs, a horrid business, and toward the end the poor earthworm, who was cackling to himself like a whip every time he flew through the air from one side of the room to the other, coiled himself around James's body in a panic, and he refused to unwind. Oh, the frantic and terrible trip. But it was all over now, and the room was suddenly very quiet and still. Everybody was beginning to slowly and painfully disentangle himself from everyone else. "Let's have some light," shouted the late centipede. "Yes," they cried. "Light, give us some light." "I'm trying," answered the poor glowworm. "I'm doing my best. Please be patient." They all waited in silence, and then a faint greenish light began to glimmer out of the glowworm's tail, and this gradually became stronger and stronger until it was anyway enough to see by. "Some great journey," the centipede said, limping across the room. "I shall never be the same again," murmured the earthworm. "Nor I," the ladybug said. "This has taken years off my life." "But, my dear friends," cried the old green grasshopper, trying to be cheerful, "we are there." "Where?" they asked. "Where is there?" "Well, I don't know," the old green grasshopper said, "but I'll bet it's somewhere good." "We're probably at the bottom of a coal mine," the earthworm said gloomily. "We certainly went down, 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 down very suddenly at the last moment, and I felt my stomach. I still feel it." "Perhaps we're in the middle of a beautiful country full of songs and music," the old green grasshopper said. "Or near the seashore," James said eagerly, "with lots of other children down in the sand for me to play with." "Pardon me," murmured the ladybug, turning a trifle pale, "but am I wrong in thinking that we seem to be bobbing up and down?" "Bobbing up and down," they cried. "What on earth do you mean?" "You're still giddy from the journey," the old green grasshopper told her. "You'll get over in a minute. Is everybody ready to go upstairs now and take a look around?" "Yes, yes," they chorused. "Come on, let's go." "I refuse to show myself out of doors with my bare feet," said the centipede, "and I have to get my boots on first." "Oh, for heaven's sakes, let's not go through all that nonsense again," the earthworm said. "Let's all lend a centipede a hand and get this over with," the ladybug said. "Come on." So they all did, except Miss Spider, who set about weaving a long rope ladder that would reach from the floor up to the hole in the ceiling. The old green grasshopper had wisely said that they must not risk going out on the side entrance when they didn't know what they were up for. But first they must all go up to the top of the peach and have a look around. So half an hour later, when the rope ladder had been finished and hung, and the 42nd boot had been laced neatly upon Centipede's 42nd foot, they were all ready to go. Amidst the mounting excitement and shouts of, "Here we go, boys! The promised land! I can't wait to see it!" the whole company climbed up the ladder one by one and disappeared into a dark, soggy tunnel in the ceiling that went steeply, almost vertically upward. And that's where we'll stop today. So we'll see what they find tomorrow when we begin with chapter 18 of James and the Giant Peach.